Thank you. I'm pleased to be here again, even though I don't know what is better, to speak just before a meal or just after one. I didn't even have coffee, so you have to bear with me. I'm a traditional participant in this wonderful event, but it has become increasingly gloomy. I remember 3 years ago, we talked about Euro crisis. Last year, we talked about the Ukraine crisis. This year, we talk about refugee crisis. Enough, I cannot take it any longer. We have to do something to get out of this situation. It's not just that there is a situational psychological gloom. No, problems are very serious. And we know it because the media cannot let us forget about this. But of course, when you try to apply solutions, you ought to know what is the reasons for all these. We have those soul-searching sessions from session to sessions, and we don't know what to put our money on. Because at the end of the day, I believe that if we would have a proposal, however painful and however costly, our societies will go along with it if they would think that this is credible enough, this is viable enough. It's like taking, a medicine or going through operation. You don't like it, but if you trust the doctor, they identify the problem, we can go ahead, and with all the risk you get from the nurse before you go on operations, they say everything can go wrong, that you nevertheless go through this. But the problem is that we don't really understand what went wrong. What went wrong? We are here in Europe, rich, we are absolutely at peace with each other. We overcame all the terrible past we've been confronted through for so many years. And yet, something goes wrong and we don't know how to stop it. And I think the reason for this is that somehow our thinking has not adjusted sufficiently to change. And our institutions, of course, cannot function like they functioned in the 20th century with challenges of the 21st century. So this is my own take why we are in those troubles now. It may sound for you a little bit abstract. If you will have a politician, they will blame another party for the problem, If you would have a think tank person, he would blame the leadership for the problem. If you would have a journalist, they would tell you it's a question of strategy. Well, I don't think it's so simple. I actually think we have leaders we deserve. They are part of us. We shouldn't expect too much. We have the media as they are. There is something else which we have to understand, which is maybe complicated, but all those things are complicated. Everything is linked to everything, but you cannot always argue, well, everything is linked to everything, therefore we cannot do anything. We need to know where to put our money on. And if I look from the perspective of some 30, 40 years at Europe, this is the time I studied it carefully. Did I say something wrong? No. If I look at Europe from this perspective, I think we have experienced 3 profound revolutions, and we still live with implications of them and don't know what to do about them. And the problem is that while we are able to understand separately those revolutions, we never think about them together. And as it happened, because we talk about refugees, it's so funny that we talk so little about borders. Because I think those three revolutions, which I think happened over the last 30 years, were about something what I called unbounding. They changed the nature of borders in Europe, or they even got rid of those borders. And we don't know whether we can, and if so, how to restore them. And the borders are not just lines on the map. Borders are very complex institutions which define relationship between territory, authority, and rights. And let me tell you what are those three revolutions which have shaken our continent. They were also present in other parts of the world, but there was this very important European variations of this. First, of course, was the geopolitical revolution. It started with the fall of Berlin Wall. Then it continued. Germany has been reunited. Soviet Union collapsed. EU enlarged, NATO enlarged. And then we had, in this, Balkan War. Then we had Arab Spring and Arab Winter, or if the French would say, revolution and counter-revolution. This is only in our neighborhood. There were powerful geopolitical earthquakes, which basically totally changed, the way in which we look at borders and where borders are. What we have seen in Ukraine is only one episode of what was happening in the East for some years already, with Chechnya, with Georgia, with Moldova, and so on. And the same in the South. At the same time, more or less, we have observed an economic unbounding, economic revolution. We call it globalization. But what was globalization in Europe? In Europe, globalization was the single market project, which was more or less completed and independently of the fall of communism, for instance, at the same time, with different objectives. Single market and later common currency was a response to globalizations of Europe. And what has single market done with currency? They basically got rid of many economic borders or redefined some of those existing ones. They never were thought together. And they were done by different people. And then there was the third unbounding revolution. It's my favorite, and I think the least understood and probably the most powerful. This was the Internet revolution. The Internet revolution, which exists more or less 3 decades. Since, from early 90s. And it profoundly changed Europe again. It, economic transaction, it's not only just that it abandoned all borders to communication. It also abandoned the border between what is private and what is public. But it also totally revolutionized economic transactions. All these financial transactions of a second, made globally, were not possible in the era before Internet. So, Internet also changed democracy. Pillars of our democratic deliberative discourse, newspapers, are basically dying. All democracy became more about spin rather than discourse. You see, and I can go on and on to show you implications of this digital revolution. And as I said, it's not only the problem that different people know different pieces of this puzzle. I tried in recent years to get together political scientists together with media specialists. They couldn't understand each other at all. They didn't want to talk to each other. I'm not even talking about discourse between economists and political scientists. If you are not mathematicians, you will not get a tenure in any department of economics today. So our thinking, our institutions, our kind of visions of what is normal and abnormal have been totally shaken by that. Capitalism, democracy, all of those, established systems, we believe we know what they are. We don't know any longer because of those shocks. And what is also important, they produce winners and losers. So the power structure also has changed. So to conclude, I believe in order to try thinking seriously, how can we conceptualize all this, what I call myself, neo-medieval environment, which was generated by this unbounding, we would need to start thinking anew about the relationship of authority, rights, and territory. This triangle is fundamental. We would have to make winners of those revolutions to share their gains with the losers. And we would probably have to rethink our all institutional structures, because it is very clear that the way they work today is not adequate to the challenges. And I just give you one example before I finish. Last year we had here Tony Barber talking about the cities. And he may have exaggerated saying, that if the mayors will run the world, everything will be perfect. No. But if you look at Europe today, the winners in institutional terms as public actors are concerned are clearly cities. They generate growth. They basically provide jobs, innovation, and increasingly social policies to people. When you send your mothers to hospital or a child to school, you think about city or the state. But they are in decision-making process of the European Union nowhere. At the decision-making table are sitting what? A representative of failed states like Greece, or mini-states like Latvia, which is smaller than the city of Vienna, certainly in economic terms. So I just give you an example how all of this has changed the geography of power in Europe. And we have to adjust our mental maps to that. And before we do this, we will just have one of these empty meetings of our leaders after another, ending up with sort of semi-demi solutions which satisfy nobody and solve very little. As I always say, I'm a great fan of aspirin, but we've been applying aspirin to everything, to Euro crisis, to wars on our borders, and now to the refugee crisis. Aspirin cannot solve the very difficult challenges we are faced with. We have to think bigger, in bigger terms. But of course, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't solve the problems which arise on a daily basis, because this is something my good friend from London is going to talk about, and I'll leave you with that.